Say 1960s DC, and some people might think of the Teen Titans. Or the Freedom Movement, but
Detective Comics hit serious pay dirt when they decided to put all their sidekick characters on one team. Initially, this could be seen as trying to pad out sales with another monthly property, but Teen Titans quickly turned into one of the most steadfast DC properties ever. The timing was perfect. It was the 60s, the age of youthful rebellion. And even though Titans struck a big chord at the time, the themes that they explore are inherent to any coming-of-age story.
Have all four sidekicks ever been in the same place at the time?
Don't call us sidekicks. Not after today.
So not only can Titans be retold again and again in different and interesting ways, the youth and or sidekick team has become a common trope. And then there's the geek. I let us in with Teen Titans because I think that's an excellent juxtaposition towards the geek. While Teen Titans can be reinvented from generation to generation, the geek seems to be as relevant and versatile as pet rock, despite both being products of the same time. Because you know what's a great idea? The world's first hippie superhero.
Tune in, turn on, Hulk out!
That's not to say that non-violent superheroes can't be interesting or effective. It's just hard to get other people to buy into it when even you don't believe it. But the lazy ways of the hippies are not for brother power. Life is something special. He wants to savor life, to soar like a bird.
wow. Way to really appeal to the audience you're trying to reach out to. Hey everybody, look at his character. He's just like you. He's not a worthless piece of shit.
Where do I even start with this? Well, with an old sewing dummy brought to life by a lightning bolt.
Do you know that lightning can do anything because this mythology makes no sense?
Well, actually, there's more to it than that. You see, after a bunch of hippies get their faces pounded in some mud by a gang of greasers, they head back to their squatting spot, an abandoned clothing warehouse, and decide to hang their threads on this kooky modeling dummy to dry them off. So I guess it was the combination of blood, primordial ooze, and hippie stank that soaked into the dummy's bedding and reacted to the intense amount of energy, bringing the dummy to life. Naturally, the hippies take it under their wing and give him the name Brother Power.
Great name. Yeah, isn't it? I got it off a hairdryer.
They even take him to elementary school, because first you have to program the culture into him before you can counter it. But it's quickly discovered that Power has a substantial intellect, even going so far as to examine the secrets of its own anatomy.
Like chemistry is my bag. I've been trying to figure out what makes me go-go. Man, I'm loaded with electrical energy. The wires that I'm strung out on are grooving with 1,000,000 swinging volts.
Human body's basically a potato clock.
As for his powers, he of course has the standard superhuman strength and nearly Spider-Man-like agility. He has no bones or internal organs, making him remarkably flexible, and the makeup of his nervous system is completely unknown, which means he can take an incredible amount of punishment without even flinching.
Ow! You're sick! You're sick! Why would you do that to me? I'm just kidding you, pal.
After a while, he will begin to weaken, but all he needs is a jolt of electricity to recharge him, and he's stronger than ever. He discovers this after being kidnapped by a criminal ringleader. No, really, a literal crooked carny tries to kidnap him and put him on display, which is how he became known as the Geek. Actually, he became known as the Geek after he beat the crap out of his captors, who then called the police on him. After the carnies attack him in front of the authorities, making him look super suspicious by the way, Power's inept hippie brothers advise him to split, because, you know, the man doesn't understand them. You want to know how perma-stoned these stupid hippies are? The Geek gets kidnapped in broad daylight around a circus parade, helping repair a circus float by people that look like circus performers. So of course this is the work of the Greasers, and the only way to deal with them is with a peace drum hippie flag freakout march.
This isn't working! Love is just an abstract concept. You can't knock down stuff.
Even the Greasers take a moment out of their beating to point out the flaw in their logic. And just to cement how stupid his friends are, they organize a protest of a local rocket factory. But Brother Power, who's friends with the factory owner, points out that the rockets are for space exploration. With friends like this, who needs enemies? Like the Berlin airplanes. A gang that dresses up like fighter pilots and rides a giant wooden World War I bomber that immediately crashes the one and only time it's used. Maybe because it doesn't have an engine, maybe because even working biplanes were never meant to have 10 people hang off them. And finally, there's the Geek's arch rival, Lord Slide Rule. Hey, don't laugh. He's kinda like Dr. Doom. Okay, actually there's no comparison. Doom is a badass in a hood and metal suit. Slide Rule appears to be a 60-year-old Danish toddler.
However, he is described as an industrial and engineering genius, with his eyes set on the aforementioned American rocket factory, converting it to weapons manufacturing and making a fortune in the arms race. Because 1960s America was just so keen on handing over military contracts to European weirdos at the time.
The only stipulation is that in order to gain total control of the company, Slide Rule will have to find a way to boost production. But it's Brother Power that points out that because the way the conveyor belt moves, that a left-handed person could assemble the rocket components faster.
Or you could just put a right-handed person on the other side of the conveyor belt. Or have a right-handed person just use the left hand. It's not like writing or anything.
Either way, the geek's gotta die. So Slide Rule can take credit for this major breakthrough in engineering science. Well, after a surprisingly impressive fight sequence, Brother Power defeats Slide Rule, saves the factory, and even gets his stupid hippie friends some jobs. Unfortunately, Slide Rule does manage to sabotage a major project, frame Brother Power, and even shoot him into space, making this the last issue in the Geek's run. That's right, Brother Power the Geek only lasted 2 issues. I will admit, though, shooting your character into space is a decent justification for a stopping point. But man, did they manage to pack a lot in those 2 issues. Too much, as a matter of fact. I didn't even tell you how Power ran for state senator, for like 1 page.
Which is actually the plot of another DC comic at the time.
Now here's the interesting thing about this. Series creator Joe Simon, more known for co-creating Captain America, wanted to replicate the success Marvel was having at the time with the Silver Surfer, who was this philosophical wandering outcast at the time. So were we going to have space adventures with Brother Power?
Well, we may never find out, because the only far-out freak the Geek was going to meet was a rising star amongst DC's British publications.
Neil Gaiman was a huge Kirby Simon fan, which of course led him to the celebrated revamp of The Sandman. From a guy with a mask and a sleep gun, to a deity ruling over the dreams of mortals. So you can't blame him for indulging his inner fanboy and taking a crack at one of Joe's more obscure characters in an issue of Swamp Thing Annual. I understand the compulsion, but I don't necessarily condone the result. Neil Gaiman reintroduces the Geek into the modern DC continuity, circa 1989, by having his satellite crash into the middle of Tampa Bay. Well, having Firestorm let it crash, because he went all Dr. Manhattan. Then some government guy calls Batman, and he tells them to find Swamp Thing's wife, who's carrying his baby after he supposedly died. Swamp Thing's baby, not Batman's. That's something else. And also there's this hippie and a former reporter with PSTD, and they get kidnapped by a different government asshole because they've been helping Abigail, Swamp Thing's baby mom. They want her because they think the Geek has something to do with Swamp Thing, since it is the title of the comic book.
Man, comics are confusing. I, as a member of the 18 to 35 male demographic, would find it much easier to spend a minuscule amount of my money on comics if, say, the whole continuity that people had fallen in love with was just erased. Just walk down the halls of DC and smack all the books out of these nerds' hands.
Okay, so in a world full of all sorts of bizarre superhumans, why would the government think the Geek would have anything to do with Swamp Thing? Well, maybe that's because of the first time he shows up. Hello, everybody! I'm back! Far out! I'm grooving on 1,000,000 swinging votes, and I love you all! Whoops!
If elected, I promise everybody could do his own thing, and everything could do his own body.
Okay, the Geek may have been a hippie but he wasn't a goofball. And if you remember, he was quite astute. Neil Gaiman's Geek, however, obnoxiously contorts about, spouting cliche 1960s lingo like the fourth Austin Powers movie we thankfully never got.
Ouch, baby. Very ouch.
But to be honest, I think anyone would act crazy if they spent 25 years in space all alone. And we all know police procedure in dealing with people with delicate mental health.
Get away from me, friggin' geek. Don't go uptight, brother. I'm telling it like it is. Yeah, just another dumb corpse to dump on the pile then.
Another dumb corpse? What the shit was that? But what should I expect from a guy who unloaded into someone for being slightly taller than them? But don't worry, folks. The geek just disintegrates and then reassembles himself into a giant from city debris? What? Also, clothes and mannequins all over the city have been coming to life. Okay, regeneration and maybe some sort of telepathic manipulation. Big deal, big brother. So those things are similar to what Swamp Thing can do. But lots of people share the same kind of powers. You can't tell me that there isn't some kind of government form that asks if the ice powers were mechanical, organic, or magical.
Everyone freeze! Oh, for f***'s sake!
Oh, I completely forgot about Chillblaine. You and America, buddy.
But here's the thing. Whenever Abigail gets close to wherever the geek has been, it starts to hurt her and the baby. Somehow the government was right. The geek and Swamp Thing are totally the same. That night, Abigail is visited by something that describes itself as an elemental, part of the mystical set of the DC universe. It tells her Swamp Thing, the geek, and even the baby inside her are all elementals.
Not only does this completely reclassify what Brother Power is, it also implies that he is a freak of nature amongst freaks of nature.
In times of trouble, the earth, our mother, brings forth champions. We come through fire into water and become what we become. Sometimes elements are missing. Sometimes things go wrong. Imagine, Abby, lightning strikes a doll, soaked in blood and water, and douse it with life. Once it was a failure. That was all, a failure. One of Earth's mistakes. Now it is more than that. It is a doll god, a puppet elemental, like others before it.
I can handle this change because it's actually a better reason for a dummy coming to life, but did Neil Gaiman have to make him such a spastic idiot? I realize he may have been trying to recapture the goofy nature of the Silver Age comics, but this is just off-putting. And it really doesn't explain why he never used these powers before. And if he is some kind of doll elemental, shouldn't he be limited to jumping between other doll-like objects? The first time I saw this panel, I was completely lost about why he was the side of a building. Yeah, because, you know, Barbie, a brick, they're pretty much the same thing. This is especially weird in contrast to the great job Gaiman did with Prez in Sandman. Another super gimmicky comic about America's first teenage president and his Native American sidekick, who defeat an evil executive with the power of nature.
Nature in its ass!
I was especially impressed with his treatment of Boss Smiley, turning a ham-fisted analogy of corporate branding into an actual malevolent spirit, tempting Prez to go astray under the guise of reasonable compromises.
And the geek, the creature that lives and fights for its soul, becomes a rerun of Laugh-In.
It all comes to a head when the hippie runs into the geek, and after a heart-to-heart, the geek decides to go on a journey to rediscover America. Actually, it's less of a heart-to-heart and more like a one-sided conversation with bong water. Hello, lamppost! Hello, street! So because the still unidentified threat just wanders off in an unstable mental state, the government declares mission accomplished. Well, at least Abigail got some thick green out of this so she can take care of the baby. Of course, that's the thing that got her in this mess in the first place.
And now, folks, here's our next number.
Now, despite the seemingly promised resurgence of Brother Power in the DC Universe, we wouldn't see him for another 4 years, when he got his own limited title under DC's Vertigo Visions imprint.
And oh boy, if you thought anything up to this point was confusing and batshit crazy, breath in our faces, surge in our hearts, PMS, PMS, PMS!
I don't even know how to respond to this.
This arc reintroduces us to the character of Cindy, the girl I didn't think to introduce in the first place, because all she did was patch up the geek and kind of flirt with him a little. Well, it turns out Cindy got lost in the 60s, and is now a former prostitute that runs a women's spiritual support group, because apparently the geek was the best thing to ever happen to her.
That's so very, very sad.
Well, really, she could be doing better, especially since she's being stalked by a psychopath who runs an evil circus. And I mean like obviously evil. They are not even trying to hide it behind a veil of irony, which is where our titular character comes in. Yeah, they kinda left the Brother Power out of the title for a reason. The geek is being forced to do this by Dr. Abuse, a cosmic sadist who has the ability to read your mind and remind you of all your worst experiences and shortcomings. I think. He sometimes offers to take these feelings away, but in exchange you become his amnesic slave. I think. Again, it's kind of hard to keep track. You see, the geek, now haunted by horrific nightmares and toys constantly pleading for him to return to them, just wanders off and fuses to a tent. And thanks to a flashback with the hippie on the beach, we realize this is a direct continuation of the events in the Swamp Thing issue. But in this version of the geek, the character just mimics his surroundings. If he goes to a Nazi rally, he'll start spouting incoherent hate speech. If he goes to a group therapy session, he will parrot back everything he's heard.
Do you want some coffee?
Do I? Yes, have some. Yes, have some.
It's hard to tell if this is memory loss at the hands of Dr. Abuse, or, being a doll, naturally takes on the persona people around him project. But the first thing we see him do is walk down the business district. And faster than you can say Wolf of Wall Street, the geek picks up on the corporate mentality and uses his building powers for industrial spying. And you'll never guess whose company he takes over. You know something? You remind me of someone I once shot into space. So exactly how many living mannequins has he actually come across? 9! This is interesting. The last time we saw Slide Rule, he was being arrested for industrial sabotage and no doubt endangering the public. So I can only assume he got off on some kind of technicality and decided that maybe the best way to conduct business is not to dress like a Renaissance Fair employee and have your entourage do somersaults around the office. Or, you know, at least wait till the Christmas party.
He got out of the supervillain game, and I can respect him for that. He barely kept things together with a ragdoll as his biggest enemy. I mean, how's he gonna deal with Supes or the Dark Knight?
And he seems to be running a legitimate business now. I mean, even if he's still crooked, he's still employing thousands of innocent, hardworking people. That is until our hero performs a hostile takeover and forces it into bankruptcy. Oh my god, now I remember what the art style in this comic reminds me of.
Rick-a-tick-a-tick-tock, tick-tock-tock. Ring, ring-a-ding-ding, ring-a-ding-ding. Rick-a-dick-rick, rick-a-dick-rick. Ring-a-ding-a-ding-ding-dong. Rim, 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 rim.
And this is somehow all part of Dr. Abuse's plan. I think. I mean, it looked like he'd let the geek wander off and shows up after he gets the factory. That is until I get to the end of the comic, when it's shown that the geek didn't go anywhere, and this whole thing was part of one continuous flashback since the hippie. Yeah, I thought the flashback ended there, and I just assumed this is what happened after the geek escaped the circus off-screen. So how is this meant to work? At what point did he meet Dr. Abuse off-screen? Why would he tell him to take over a factory? You'd think the circus would pay for all his expenses. Wait, why am I even bringing up money? He's a monster that can erase minds.
Why is he doing this to the geek? What does Cindy have to do with this? What is his plan?
Okay, here's the deal. There are 3 mystical trees somewhere in the universe. One is the Tree of Life, one is the Tree of Death, and the third is, and stay with me now, a Tree of Dolls that somehow counters the Tree of Death more so than the Tree of Life. I guess the idea is that we find dolls comforting, and they can sometimes be our only friends when things get really bad.
You're my best friend, Daisy. You're my best friend too, Anais. What the?
This is actually where the Geek is from. He's a denizen of the Doll Tree Dream World that crossed over into our world through this vessel. I don't know where Dr. Abuse fits in all this, but he wants to destroy the Tree of Dolls because... I don't know. He's just evil. He's just an evil, evil douchebag. He is literally filled with eldritch chlamydia. He thinks that the Geek can somehow open a connection to the tree, and is using Cindy to trigger that. I think. Because if that was the case, why did he let the people he needed the most just roam around? He had a chance to abduct Cindy back when she was a prostitute. He actually paid her money just to talk to her once. And then never lost track of her. What was he waiting for? Well, anyway, torturing Cindy somehow opens the connection, and the Geek starts turning into the doll tree. I think. But just then, Cindy's support group comes rushing in, screaming... well, I already showed you that part. But it's not like they really help, because in the end, Dr. Dumbass sets fire to the tree and ends up trapped in his own burning circus. And it's not like that seemed to do anything either, because the Geek just possesses another doll, implying that the real doll tree wasn't destroyed. All thanks to our hero. I think. Batman can make anything better. There was an entire show on Cartoon Network based on this theory. Unfortunately, the Geek never appeared in that series. But he did appear in an issue of the comic book based on it, where he helped Batman defeat Mad Mod by taming some psychotic psychedelic polycottons. Not much to comment on story-wise, it's just a 3-page cameo. But aesthetically, I think this is my favorite interpretation of the Geek. Bright, colorful outfit, but still tattered. Moppy hair that sometimes obscures his eyes and sometimes it doesn't, which is an unexpected but vast improvement, because it gives you the iconic look of the Geek, but also lets you see his facial expressions. And again, very much improved. They actually seem to fit the character. He's not all bug-eyed or manic. He seems youthful and energetic, yet mellow and easygoing. If they were ever going to bring back Brother Power, I say they should use this as a visual reference. But they wouldn't, because this is a kiddie comic for babbies, and everything has to be all serious and dark. Speaking of which, let's back up a bit to the last real story to feature Brother Power, the ongoing Brave and the Bold title, which is still mostly an excuse to team up with Batman. This issue was written by J. Michael Straczynski. I mentioned him in my very first episode of Familiar Faces. He was a writer on The Real Ghostbusters, but left the show after a lot of executive tampering tanked the ratings. He would then return in an attempt to salvage the series, and write a very tongue-in-cheek episode explaining why Janine had gone through so many changes. I bring this up because this issue is very much self-aware, opening with young Bruce watching Frankenstein with his father, obviously drawing parallels between the original conception Joe Simon had for Brother Power, and, like Frankenstein, the continuity of the Geek has been fudged a bit as it goes from writer to writer. And it also reminds us that in every incarnation, Batman is basically the guy from Dream On.
Actually, Straczynski is hanging a lantern on the fact that he is ignoring the Neil Gaiman, Rachel Pollack, and even the Joe Simon Geek. In this story, Brother Power is not an elemental with doll powers. He's not from the doll world. He didn't even get launched into space.
No, in this timeline, Brother Power walked away from the movement when things started to turn violent. It also implies that he and Cindy got together because the story begins with him crawling out of the burnt remains of the abandoned Cindy toy store. And yes, I know there's a way to connect that back to a prostitute joke, but much like Batman, I can't be bothered. Yeah, Batman finds him weak and confused, but doesn't really know how to help a living mannequin. So he just leaves him.
The bat signal. Huh. I wonder where he's always going in such a hurry.
From there, the Geek kinda just wanders off before authorities can reach him, and even starts patrolling the area on his own. And Batman seems glad to have the help, admitting that he gets so caught up fighting supervillains, sometimes he just can't deal with street-level crime anymore. But the fact that Power's building suddenly burned down after all these years of being abandoned did seem odd. And sure enough, Batman notices a pattern of possible arsons around the area. And thanks to some handy portable cameras, it turns out the fires are the work of some guy. Some guy hired by some company to burn down buildings so they can build a mall. Sorry, Firefly. I know you would have been perfect for this story involving arson. And as a psychotic pyromaniac with little concern for life, you would have been an excellent foil for the peace-loving, self-sacrificing geek. But hey, you were the first boss in that kick-ass NES game, and no one can ever take... Ooh. Speaking of burns, the last time Batman sees Brother Power, he's in a burning building trying to save a homeless family. Power kind of gives this speech about how things have changed for the worse and how he's finally awake after everyone's gone to sleep. It's supposed to be the emotional crux of the story, but just comes off as heavy-handed and preachy. Apparently, people never got stupid drunk before the 1980s, and all we do now is spend time on the phones.
If only there was some way to rekindle the artistic and social awareness of the 1960s, with people from all walks of life coming together in open communication. If only there was some sort of invention that could close the distance and bring people together. Like a star...
Babylon 5. Luckily, the moment is completely saved, along with a baby. The geek himself being engulfed in flames. No doubt a visual metaphor for Brother Power's hope for the next generation, despite the shortcomings of the previous. With the family safe and the geek's body missing, Batman quietly reflects on the night's events and wonders if Brother Power will ever return. And even though it has a possibility for continuation, all in all, this is a wonderfully touching, self-contained excursion for Brother Power.
And that's Brother Power the Geek. A character that can't seem to catch a break no matter how many chances he gets. But why?
Why does he get so many chances? Why do so many talented people keep coming back to him? And if not that, then why are there so many references to him strung around the DC universe? The novelty? Well, let's go back to the creation. Yeah, Joe Simon may have been trying to bank on the hippie popularity to sell the comic, but how is that any different from what he did in the 1920s? This is the guy that said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's have a guy dressed as the American flag punch Hitler in the face." And despite how goofy that sounds, it was a huge hit, and started a huge trend of wartime superheroes. Then you pass it off to Neil Gaiman. He didn't make the geek a mystical, magical mystery twerp because it was the popular thing to do. He did it because he made it the popular thing to do, with his writing. Gaiman loves deities and pantheons and existentialism just as much as he loves Kirby and Simon. You know, because he's goth or French or whatever. Flash forward to the 90s, where Rachel Pollack turns the geek into a grungy, tortured spiritual nomad, constantly being bombarded with messages about who he should be. Hey, that's how some people felt at the time. And the last entry, genre savvy and retrospective. It's more of a commentary on the history of the geek itself. Heck, even Power himself reminisces about how things were better in the old days. It's the most complete story, but it doesn't really add anything new. At first I thought the geek was just this gimmicky character, following whatever fad was big at the time in order to move papers. But once I got past my cynicism, I realized all the writers who have written for the geek share the same traits with each other as they do with the character. Misguided enthusiasm, but undeniable sincerity. At his core, Brother Power is naive, but a good-natured soul who wants to help others and experience new things. And I think we can all relate to that on some level. But sometimes we get so caught up in our own passions that we make mistakes or just come off as weird to others. But that's okay. That's the process of learning. That's the process of being alive. So in a way, the geek has achieved that timeless relevance in the same way other superheroes have. Because he may be Brother Power, but we have all been the geek.
You just blew my fucking mind.
We're freaking out squares.
Weirdos.